Hi, I am Kirsten Myers. I am the Assistant Superintendent of Student Services and Special Education at Kent ISD. This special scoop is focused on ensuring that each and every student with a disability receives a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. This is a top priority at the federal and state level and here in Kent County because there is a growing emphasis on closing the gap between the IDEA and the intent of the law and its implementation in our schools. Our work in special education is guided by the principle that every student, regardless of disability, has the civil right to learn in the least restrictive environment. Per IDEA, this means that students with disabilities should be educated alongside their peers in the general education setting to the maximum extent appropriate. Removal of children with disabilities from the regular education environment occurs only if the nature or severity of the disability is such that education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. This starts with developing a strong PLAF, present level of academic achievement and functional performance, that guides our goals and objectives while also identifying the necessary supplementary aids and services, such as accommodations, modifications, and other supports to ensure the student's access to the general education classroom. It's important to understand that the law does not specify that a removal from the regular education environment should only occur if a student meets a certain eligibility or threshold. It also does not state that a student should be removed from the regular education environment simply because they are in 8th grade and reading at 3rd grade level, or they're not ready for general education, or maybe the student has limited cognitive functioning, or they're not independent. While significant progress has been made, we must remain diligent in providing the services, accommodations, modifications, and supports necessary for students to thrive in general education settings whenever possible. In alignment to IDEA and the requirement to provide a continuum of alternative placements to meet the unique needs of students with disabilities, the Kent County K-12 Special Education LRE Continuum prioritizes the general education classroom as the first and primary consideration for all students. When more restrictive placements are being considered, the focus should first be on supporting students within the general education setting through push-in services, supplementary aids, and additional supports. Any removal from the general education environment into a special education program or related services office should only be considered when these supports are insufficient to meet the student's needs in the general education environment and the student is unable to make meaningful progress, which would be evidenced and documented on the IEP progress report. Also, the goal is that any movement up the continuum should involve intensifying the supports and services to ensure continued access to the general education curriculum while also addressing the core features of the student's disabilities. A more restrictive placement should always be viewed as temporary to the maximum extent possible. The key is to balance inclusion with necessary supports and ensure that the placement is appropriate for each student's needs. To foster a culture of inclusion and ensure that all students with disabilities receive an appropriate education in the least restrictive environment, we must begin with a shared set of beliefs and a growth mindset. Let's start with presuming competence. Adults working with students with disabilities need to be strong advocates for competency and high levels of independence and achievement, both academically and socially. Second, intensive and high-quality specially designed instruction is provided at all levels of the continuum and is research-based, targeted, flexible, and is based on data supporting the student's identified strengths and skill deficits or core features of the student's disability and or the identified barriers to accessibility. Staff and families are valued by engaging them meaningfully in the IEP process and specifically in the development of supplementary aids and services supporting the training, advocacy, consultation, technology, communication, and behavioral supports needed for students to participate in the least restrictive environment. As a reminder, the LRE Continuum is considered at least annually, and discussion is guided by the specially designed instruction the student requires in their least restrictive environment, and again, based on the unique needs of the student. Lastly, all placement decisions are student-centered and based on the unique and individualized needs of the student, which is based on the development of a high-quality IEP, which includes specific and objective data collected and analyzed over time. A belief in the potential of every student is the foundation for a truly inclusive education. Pat Riddell, attorney and advocate, states that if IDEA's legal standards were applied with fidelity, no student would be excluded from general education on a long-term basis. Our current understanding of human development and educational best practices combined demonstrate that sustained segregation is never appropriate and cannot ever constitute a least restrictive environment. To continue on your LRE journey, we are so excited to announce that Dr. Shelley Moore will be joining Kent ISD on January 21st. Dr. Moore is an author and well-known YouTube and podcast series host and an internationally sought-after speaker. She is widely regarded as a guru in inclusive education and is dedicated to helping schools create meaningful, supportive environments for all students. Registration can be found on our Kent ISD PD Hub. A quick reminder, students should not be invited into inclusive environments. They are granted this right by federal law. Therefore, let's work together to uphold this civil right for the students and families that we serve.